Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast UX Design to Win in Business. My name is Nils, co-founder at Dingy. We're an agency for UX design, front-end development, and strategic insights when it comes to your digital products. And we speak a lot about user experience, as you know. And today I have with me Rob from Montreal. He's working or actually created Inner View, and I'm excited to talk to him today about the whole topic of AI features in software in general, like maybe at Interview, but also in general, because we have a similar interest on untangling the increasing complexity of software, I would say. But yeah, cool. Rob, welcome to the show. Maybe you can just tell us a few words about yourself.
Yeah, and thank you. I really appreciate being here. And I've sort of been in software for a long time now. I've worked with the co-founder of Siri twice. And the first time was sort of on Siri with steroids. It was at a company called Viv. And this was about 8 years ago, where we didn't really have a lot of the UI and UX understanding of AI. But now we've kind of fast forward into this new world with language models, and things have really shifted. So I'm really excited to kind of help people navigate that a little bit more and also share a little bit along the way of what we're doing at Interview.
Awesome. Yeah. When you say the co-founder of Siri, like you're talking about Siri on the phone, like
Exactly.
the voice assistant.
Yeah, I started working with Adam Chire and Doug Kitlaus. And he kind of worked on Siri for about 25 years before all of that actually happened. So he has this really interesting demo that you can see on YouTube where kind of goes through and shows all the things that Siri used to be able to do before Apple actually purchased Siri, and then kind of took all of that out. So
Really?
yeah, it's sort of like not too many people know that element about Siri.
Exactly. I think I would bet that most of everyone would probably say, well, Siri was invented by Apple,
Yep,
right?
exactly. No, it was a really interesting research project for a long time. And after Apple bought Siri, they kind of took off a lot of the functionality. And so the founders wanted to kind of do it justice, take it to where they thought it could go. And so they created Viv. And Viv was sort of, you can watch it on YouTube as well. It's sort of, you could ask it very intricate queries, like on the way to my brother's house, can you help me pick out a red wine that goes well with lasagna? So I'd have to understand all of this, and this was 8 years ago before anyone was talking about agents or anything like that, or natural language wasn't unlocked at the time. So they had to do a lot more dynamic planning and sort of intent understanding around all these different words. So it was a really cool project and really, really sharp team. But it's been fun.
Crazy. Yeah, so maybe that's actually a very good way to lead our listeners a little bit into where we're trying to go with this. So I would say everyone knows what AI should mean today, or like that if people say we integrated AI into our whatever, or we're using it, then many people are talking about, of course, ChatGPT, sometimes terms like large language models fly around. And I think, we all witnessed this launch of ChatGPT as sort of like an advent of a new time, right? It felt like this crazy point in time with all of those adoption rates and all of those crazy graphs, right? Like who had the most users in the shortest amount of time. And then it was unprecedented on ChatGPT, and you had to stand in line and whatever. And so the way you're speaking about Siri and how Apple bought the technology that they put together and then actually took features out, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, so how Siri worked 8 years ago, and not necessarily only about the technical details, but so we all know that Siri has been around for longer than ChatGPT existed. And maybe so from a UX perspective or from a user perspective, what are the differences, right? Like how does this whole AI thing come to be, like till the point in time where we're today?
Yeah, it's a really good question because a lot has changed after the last 2 years. And if you kind of go back just before ChatGPT launched, they were doing a lot of research on language models just to understand language, because where Siri has always struggled is intent. And when you look at words and you try to understand what does this person mean by what they're trying to say, there's a lot of nuance in words. Even something like, hey, get me a ride to my brother's house. Does that mean a taxi? Does it mean a friend? Does it mean like what is that? What are your preferences around that? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot that kind of is unpacked when you're looking at things like Siri or Viv, the predecessor of it all, or the successor of it. For me, Viv was a big step up from Siri because Siri just did very basic intent understanding. And a lot of that was programmatic back in the day, where you would actually do what would essentially be like an if statement, right? If this, then that. And it was not very intelligent, right? And Viv
Yeah.
did, I would say, a much more complicated version of that, where they did dynamic program generation, where you would kind of understand what is the intent of all of this. You would generate a program that actually steps through, like, these are all the things that I need to do to achieve that, right? And you can actually visualize it with Viv. And that kind of took it in this direction where anyone can create these sort of agent type experiences. This was 8 years ago. And you had to kind of have dynamic UI that kind of wraps up like weather APIs or hotels or flowers or whatever you were trying to do, right, into these intents. The hard part of all of that is the long tail of human language, right? Language is very difficult. It's very nuanced.
Yeah.
All the accents, everything. Nowadays, what you can kind of see is unlocked is that understanding layer, the intent of everything that people are trying to say. And language models, if you look prior to 2 years ago, everything was quantitative. There are all these startups doing quantitative understanding, quantitative analysis. Everything is kind of triggered off of what did the instrumentation say. Nowadays, everything is shifting more towards a qualitative world. It's like now we understand intent. We can unlock that. We can do so many things with it that drive really rich experiences and customizations in ways that you couldn't do before. Or now you can just speak to something. This was always like Adam at Siri, the technical co-founder, that was his dream, was like, if we can just talk to a thing, speaking is the most natural way versus typing or texting. It's always very terse and different. But speaking, you can just let someone kind of be who they are. And then the machine goes through and uncovers all of that and kind of extracts out what it understood about it and why that mattered. Right.
I agree. So I think for everyone, the first moment when you started to chat with ChatGPT and you had this feeling of that you were being understood, right? Like you put in whatever, like literally whatever. You could do something, I guess everybody tried something very, like, hi, how are you? Whatever. And then it came back and would say, blah, blah, right? And you're like, interesting. And then you'd go like a little bit deeper and try and probe around like what, right? And so I guess this whole thing of where people say, well, so a large language model, I don't even know if that's true anymore, but like a year ago, people said, well, it's right about whatever it says 80% of the time. And then there's hallucination part. And you have to check what comes back and so on. But I think, so especially coming from a programmer's background, I think what's really an interesting paradigm shift in my mind is that it's not 1 or 0. It's not 100%. It has to be correct, or it just doesn't do anything at all. Right. But you have this funny feeling that something is happening, and most of the stuff is sort of what you want, right? And in the first moment, you have the feeling of that it's actually magic, and only in the subsequent request, you're like, yeah, okay, so it's inventing some stuff. Yeah, all right. Yeah. But that's all right. Because it's been so amazing up until this point. And I guess, so we've just seen Apple release its new software with the whole plan to include Apple Intelligence. And apparently that didn't work out because it's being discussed as the biggest release of nothing since ever. Yeah. I don't know if I agree with this, but at least I'm still very interested to get your opinion on why you think they stripped features out of Siri back then that were in fact working already. What do you think what happened?
I mean, I think with any good software, you do need to pare down the experience into like, what is your one killer use case that will kind of help people bridge from where they are today to where they need to go. A lot of times, especially as builders and engineers, we get so hung up on like, it can do everything. Promise, like, watch. And then you go on with this like kitchen sink demo that doesn't really help anyone in any deep way.
Yeah.
I think where Siri kind of failed was like they pared it back into this really core experience, but they didn't extend it in the way that they should have after that. They didn't make it, a lot of times when you're building these apps, you need to kind of choose whether you're going to be a platform or not at some point. A lot of people try to be a platform. They don't understand what that means, right? But
Yeah.
Siri had the option to actually go down and make it extensible, make it to where people can add on to and kind of like add in what do people want? Like let the people kind of raise it more from a bottoms up perspective versus top down. So I think Siri in the early days, they were understanding what the tech was because as you've kind of seen with user research, we didn't have a lot of design patterns back in the day, right? We didn't have a lot of the UI kits, the interaction, right? Like all the expectation setting and even the training of like, how do I use this thing on an iPhone? Right? Apple has poured billions of dollars into training people, right? Like just all the navigation patterns that we have now, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's been trained and everyone knows how to do it, and I don't have to teach anyone anything new other than my new service. So
Yeah, that's true.
Apple kind of fit into that, but I think even with ChatGPT, you see it as today we've learned sort of the limitations of it, but we've also learned that like humans are very multidimensional. It can be who I need it to be. With a little bit of nudging, I think that's the magic that happens is often like people want to be understood and they want to be able to have like a deep understanding of who they are and sort of how they interact with the world. And that's the ultimate holy grail with this technology is like, finally someone understands me. Not in like
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That often comes in like user interfaces to where they're so static today. But I think the future is really more generative where we're going to be able to build our own experiences and kind of have more of like a product of one. And this is way in the future. I don't see this happening anytime recent, like in the near future, but I do see it like eventually, you know, it might even be phones or just like a generative app experience where we can have more of a personalized experience however I want it. It's how it is. And I can tweak it. I can mold it. I can kind of forge my own future. And even one day, like I foresee businesses going down this road to where you can kind of start to gather software into this really moldable form, right? Make it to where everyone has what they actually need to get unstuck where they're at in their life and make progress in a really positive way in their life.
Yeah. That's like I think that's a beautiful vision where where this could go. And also, I think it illustrates very well where we're not yet.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about recording this episode, we spoke about like the sort of the past 10 years and the coming 10 years. And I feel that when I speak with business owners here in Germany, like mid-sized companies, Germans are, well, rightfully known to be like a little bit of a stickler here and there and to want to, I guess, to say it in a positive way. Like, I think we really try to understand something 100% before we opt in or out or say yes or no or do whatever. And I think in our current situation, many businesses really struggle to keep an overview of all of the possibilities that are out there and have a hard time judging which way to go, right? Like which strategic way to go. And yeah, I think you said about the past 10 years that we sort of, we put everything together and we can apparently make everything now, or like not everything, but crazy amount of things.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's our job to sort out the mess, I would say. Like that's a bit radical, but right? Like when you and I feel, are talking about user experience and why it's important, also from a business perspective, then there's this notion of that when you were just speaking about creating more personalized experiences with software and that it's this magical moment where you feel understood as a human being rather than pointing at a button with a mouse through, right? Like, and it's very this clunky experience, but this is what we're used to. And I'm just thinking about my mom, you know, who sometimes there's all of these moments where I think that just the concept of how a window is on top of the other and, well, has the buttons that it has, and it doesn't have the fourth one that you're looking for right now, tough cookie,
Yeah,
you know?
you're stuck.
I would say to make the software more human and more approachable to a lot of non-techie people, I would say, that is definitely where we're going. And since the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of companies kind of slap on AI features, I would maybe say a little bit rough. Right? Like there was this gigantic move of Microsoft to like buy the technology and then like put it on Bing because we don't have anything to lose, and then chuck it on Office to, make like revive the paperclip or whatever.
Exactly.
So, how would you describe what's happening currently? Like what people are doing with these new technologies, and also maybe speak a little bit about your product, like Interview, and how you're incorporating AI there, and maybe comparing that to what other people are doing.
Sure. So it's an interesting area because up until now we've had very standardized ways of how we thought about software building and delivering value. And I think where we're going is the moat is no longer there in terms of the ability to build quickly. So anyone can build software quickly nowadays. You can be a team of one or two and build something that's like pretty substantial within a few months. And I do see it as there's a lot of people that are just trying to integrate AI as a way to get ahead of that, knowing that people can move faster and faster, even against, if you look at like a big company like Intercom versus Zendesk, right? Both of them are going to be rushing to kind of integrate into more qualitative world where all these customer support teams are trying to understand what do users want, right? Like, where are we going with this? What are they complaining about? How do we kind of take all this data that's been dormant for all these years and actually make good use of it before someone else does? And I think yes, to your point, they're being like very rushed in their approach, and they're learning on the fly, to be fair. Right? A lot of these people, about a year ago, I posted on Twitter or X sort of the fundamentals of assisted intelligence. And it was this long post about all the things that we had kind of discovered at Viv, that these are the primitives of what's coming in the future, probably, give or take. Right? So there's a lot of this stuff that people have to learn. They have to build up the muscle memory around. And there's elements of this that you're starting to see get launched in ChatGPT, like memory, where it's like, remember this thing about me. So one of the holy grails that I've always wanted is like an OAuth into me, the human being, right? Like, how can you understand me and my preferences? When I order a taxi, do I want it to be a Lyft or an Uber, right? When I order food, like, what are my favorite restaurants? What time do I like to like eat certain things at, right? And sort of like even the long polling requests where everything today is more instant, and we have this like, give it to me now, even if it's wrong mentality. In the future, it's going to shift to like, give it to me, even if it's in a day or a week, right? Like, find me all flights to Hawaii when it's like a good price, and then tell me about it. And it might be in like 3 weeks, but just keep an eye on it for me. We're going to change to that more asynchronous model soon, and a lot of people are learning all the design patterns around these things, right? So there's a lot of people playing catch up. For me, once all of this moves into that hyper speed mode, where like speed used to be the competitive advantage, where I see the future going is like the qualitative understanding of your customers. That's the new competitive advantage. It's about being wrong for the least amount of time possible, because other people are going to be able to build really quickly if they have the right idea, right? They're going to build the right thing, the right distribution for it, all the network effects that go with it. They're going to be able to get ahead much faster now. So we need to be able to get to an understanding of who we're building for, what are their needs, how do we talk to them, where are they at, right? And then how do we like keep that feedback loop, that evolution going to where we grow with our customers when they get stuck and everyone normalizes ChatGPT in like a few months. Okay, what's next? What do we build next? Right? That's always the difficult part. It's not launching something interesting at first. It's like launching, finding your killer feature, and not dying right after that because someone else comes up. So that's sort of what I'm building with Interview is if everyone can build quickly in the future, I want people to unlock that qualitative understanding. So to be able to unlock from all their user interviews and even have like novel ways of user interviewing in the future. My goal is to be able to make interviewing as easy as a survey, where it's like unlock all these elements of like, instead of just reaching out to someone and saying, hey, for $50, you want to jump on a call, I just want to be able to send people a link and start to kind of talk to them at scale if they're doing like bug reports or customer support or something like that. That's where I see sort of the world shifting to is we're going to be much closer to customers. We're going to talk to them all the time. They're going to be on our team in a much bigger way than they have in the past. And we're going to stop doing as many like top-down pushes out to the public. We're going to do much more like bottoms-up listening. But the whole UX team and product team and design team, everything's reconfiguring around that. And it's going to take some time to catch up.
So, like, that is the absolutely beautiful point that I've also been talking about on this show, I think from different perspectives. And what triggered me a couple months back was another UX podcast where they picked up a quote, I think from someone at Nils and Rob Group, who said that like a good user experience can also just be the stability of the software.
Sure. Yeah.
And I mean, I really had to laugh at that, but it's so true, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone has, like, if we really crunch together the last 10 years, like you came from, there's all of the sudden you have this phone that doesn't have a hardware keyboard anymore, and you can, like, you couldn't install stuff in the very first release. It was just, right, like just the apps that were there. Then you could install new stuff. And then the phone grew bigger and could do more stuff, and it had better cameras, and it and it morphed all the way into these devices we see today that are like, if you have your rubber bumper around it, it almost kind of doesn't matter anymore which one you have, I suppose.
Sure.
Right? Because it's like this, it's just like this huge rectangular display that can do stuff. And so because there's so many applications and services and so many, I feel that we kind of reached this point where it's not necessary even to invent more features faster. Like this is not, nobody's longing for this anymore. It feels like nobody needs the Concorde because it's absolutely fine to go from Frankfurt to New York in 6 hours. Like that's just fast enough. You know, like let's not oversolve this problem, sort of, but let's
diminishing
make the whole
returns.
right.
Yep.
It's so like everybody seems to be fed up with new features almost, right? Like, and the only thing that could really, I think, that kind of broke this status was the advent of that you could suddenly talk to your computer. And I think that was really the only thing in the last couple of years where I would say that really mainstream broke up people being fed up with technology. Like they kind of had this awakening of, oh, it can be different. It's not about RAM or bigger screens anymore. It's about something entirely new. And I think what you're saying is so important for decision makers and businesses in the future, because it's really a paradigm shift of how you sell your software, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not this roadmap of endless new features that everybody's waiting for. Like even, I guess, to stay with Apple, like the last watch and phone releases, there's always this undercurrent of people being like, yeah, if it's iPhone 13 or 14 or 15 or I don't even know really. And I also don't necessarily super care. I kind of wanted to not die.
Yeah. I think we're
and
safe
do what
there.
it did, right? Yeah. And so to get closer to the customer and to actually have people stay on your thing is probably much more important in the future, because once somebody chose a different service because you annoyed the heck out of them, they're probably never going to come back, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to
And
build
so-
a trust. But I think companies that, like if I could give advice to companies today, just having been in AI for a long time now, and AI has been one of those things where everyone said, oh yeah, it's coming in the next 10 years. And then like 50 years later, it wasn't there yet. But I think it's finally like getting to that point where it's coming very soon. And we're going to go through this ugly duckling period, right? Where like people are going to doubt it. It's like the internet in the early days. Everyone sort of normalized it really quick. And they're like, that's it? That's all it can do? But they didn't realize like how many people were starting to build and evolve it and kind of change their thinking around it, their lives around it. The world was changing around the internet. And the same thing is going to be true of AI. And I know so many engineers who still, to this day, after 2 years, have not really messed around with anything AI related. They haven't tried to
Really?
practice. It's quite, for me, as a, like, I've been an engineer, I've been a founder, I've been a designer, I've done like all the roles at a startup. For me, you should be learning this stuff. You should learn how it works, what the new patterns are, how to use it, how to implement it, when not to use it. Like any good editor, you should know when not to do a thing, right? But people need to understand that it is coming, even if it's going to be ugly at first, even if they get it wrong at first, even if they kind of like have to learn from their competition, right? As we often do, is like someone finally cracked that pattern, right? Someone finally cracked the Instagram reel pattern, right? Someone beat them to that. They just kind of, oh, we're gonna borrow that from them. Thanks.
Yeah.
The same is going to be true in all of these. So companies need to be practicing. They need to be understanding how to use it and when not to use it, and how to augment it, how to kind of take this and integrate it into their software in really subtle ways. And I often talk with people about hiding the vegetables. What I mean by that is like, you often want people to eat their vegetables and you shove it in their face and you're like, this is going to be good for you. Here, take it, tell me that you love it and that you love me and validate me. But you want to hide those things. You want to kind of be more subtle, and you want to just augment people. You want them to opt in, and especially in the early days, right now we need to build trust, right? So you want things that you need to find where people are stuck today and not just try to throw AI in there and be like, this is the only bridge that exists. You have to use it. But you have to find ways to like let them opt into it in subtle ways, build a little bit of trust, and then scaffold a little bit more. And teachers have been doing this with students for years and years. And the best product builders do this, where we scaffold people. We start with small little bridges and we build and extend them, right? And we have to do the same after we've built enough trust for someone to be like, do you trust me? Take my hand. Okay, I'm going to just walk a few feet with you. Great. Let's go a little bit further now. Great. Okay, do you want to keep going this direction or do you want to go a different direction? You tell me, right? Like you can go at your own pace. And I think that's where AI right now needs to go a little bit more in that direction of scaffold people at their pace. Don't try to shove it down their throats and be like, this is going to be good for you. Trust me and give me a bunch of money, right? Like find ways to kind of let people opt in and build that trust and just, I guess, trust that it's going to be around long enough that you're going to have more time to build trust in the future, and people are going to be playing catch up for many years, but you have to be practicing it now. You have to be understanding how to guide people through their own, right? Like hesitations, anxieties, everything that's kind of keeping them from wanting to adopt this today.
On that point, I think that's absolutely beautiful advice. Like, I think I feel the same way. What do you think are, I don't know, it's interesting for the developer's perspective, but because we're both from a tech background, but so what would you say are like bigger fears that people have of the technology? What are, hindrances of employing something? I know that like our favorite obstacle to overcome in Germany is always data security and privacy. And
Sure.
like, everybody, like if I build like a marketing website for a mid-sized company in Germany, I can bet a case of beer that like amongst the first 5 questions of the entire project, one of them is, but is the server located in Germany or at least the EU? And I'm like, it's anyway. But so what would you say how people feel about this? That especially those who probably, are not in the know as much and are not in the topic as deep as you are.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really a difficult one to answer because it depends on the role. I think at a company level, like from a fiduciary perspective, you need to do what's right for your business, but you start by doing right by your customers in order to do that. And I think people are going to be reminded of that a lot more these days because the barriers to entry into any software or business are much lower now. So people are going to have to do right by their customers a lot more. I think it's going to recenter our prioritization around those things. And even the topic of like security, 100%, it's important to understand that stuff, but at what cost? And people need to kind of work backwards from what do customers want And how can we deliver that? And a lot of other things need to be more secondary because we've kind of lost the way when it comes to product building. We put all these other sort of rituals in place that we feel that we need to do, and we don't question them anymore. We've just kind of normalized them. And I think this is going to really force us in a positive way to be more thoughtful because we're going to have more constraints. We're not going to have as much time to build. We're not going to have as much margin of error when we launch a business. Back in the day when you found product market fit, that really buys you margin of error to do a lot of things wrong for a long period of time and not have anything bad truly happen. Nowadays, you're not going to have as much margin. You're going to be able to do a few things wrong, but other people are going to be able to catch up much faster. So I've spoken with over 100 UX researchers at this point. I've spoken with product managers, with designers. I come from, a deep engineering background. I was a very early iOS developer. That's sort of how I got started. So for me, there's going to be a reconfiguration of teams. I've seen it both on the engineering side where you're sort of expected to do a lot more with a lot less because now you sort of have this like CTO as your sidekick. Even as a founder, you don't need a CTO anymore. You can just, go off and then you have this person that can kind of help you get yourself unblocked. And as an engineering lead, I used to think about seniority that way, where it's like, what is a junior versus a mid versus a senior person? And often it just came down to like, how much can they unblock themselves? Right? When it was actually like required, can they figure it out? I don't hire people for existing skill. I often hired for like, could they learn? Could they sort of like achieve something fast enough by learning fast enough that they get there eventually? And in this sort of future, there's a lot of UXRs, UX researchers, where they're going to have to reconfigure what their roles are, and they're going to have to think more strategically. They can't spend weeks doing these analyses of user interviews anymore, because it's not acceptable anymore. It's sort of like, well, you have a better way, why aren't you using it? And you see a lot of layoffs happening in the industry around that. And when you talk with UXRs, with product people, with designers, they all understand that. They all inherently understand it took too long. We want that sort of gold standard experience of understanding, but without the 2 weeks of actual work, without like every user interviewing taking 2 to 3 hours to analyze, right? And people are starting to roll that more up into product and design roles, for example. So even in engineering, even in product and design, everyone is just expected to do a lot more with a lot less.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I think, so as an agency, always coming in for, I think we're hired often, there's kind of two cases. Like either we make a finished thing all of our own and they kind of, somebody buys a website or a software or something and we just make it like the entire thing. And that's one thing. And the other thing is that we're bought in sort of as, I feel almost like a cheat code.
Exactly.
There's like, we're in a project right now where the organization, like I actually know them kind of well because I worked there 10 years ago. And then I went on this whole first freelancing and then into agency mode and so on. And so now we're on this ongoing project for a couple months where they have their team set up, like they have this squad and that squad, and they do, it's not per role anymore. It's not the designers and the developers, but they have this whole squad structure where they're like, you're in charge of this platform and you're in this and so on. But there's just still so much complexity they have to lift inside of the organization. Like I think some things that they try to alleviate from other huge organizations that are like very hierarchical, they try to kind of counter with freedom and with everyone having the ability or be enabled to talk to all the other squads to make stuff happen. But still, I feel like that they are caught up in a lot of complexity that where most of it is probably like if we were the Borg, if we had like a shared consciousness, then probably 80% of that time that is needed to work in this way would maybe even go away, because I feel the biggest challenge is sort of to have the other people understand where you're going with this, why you want it, what's the benefit for whom, and all of these discussions going on. And so when we come in as an outsider who basically has no idea about the structure or how stuff works, right? Then, and if I say cheat code, then I know that we're supposed to, I think, ruffle feathers a little bit. I feel like we're kind of being sent in to deliberately not know about the structure and just start to do stuff, right? And so one big point against UX research or user research in general was always that I felt people in charge said something like along the lines, not necessarily super clearly, but it came out to be that way, that they said, look, we have Scrum, we have sprints, we have this and that, and all of the rituals that you mentioned before as well. And they all take so long already. Like, we can't add 3 weeks of UX research to that. Like, it's like, this doesn't fit my OKR checkbox goals, like it just takes too long. And so the way that I think you and I want to focus more on the user's needs and what you're describing with, we're going to be reconfiguring how teams work, what we learn, what we know, how we approach software development is really going to be like a little bit more of a fundamental shift, because what you and I are asking, I think, is not to just add on another activity to how a team puts together a software, but to literally like turn it around.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can't just go build something and then ask people if they like it or not. That's just like, I think that didn't work really well ever. And it's going to work a lot less well in the future. So what we're saying is you have to sort of know where you're going with whatever you're developing from the very beginning on, and have like a high level of certainty that this is in fact a problem worth solving and investing time in. And then kind of recheck all the time, like really rework how you get feedback from your customers and how you can make them happy for the long run and to keep them on with your thing. And that doesn't mean a feature roadmap of 72 items in a quarter, but maybe it's literally one feature that you're working on, right? Is that what you're saying too?
For me, so one of the designers from Viv, I remember this because it just stuck with me as such an important primitive in my mind. They had this exercise around the 5-second car. And it's a simple design exercise that you take a sheet of paper and you give someone 2 minutes to draw a car. And obviously with 2 minutes, you have a lot of time, not a ton, but enough to draw the car, the wheels, the windshield, maybe some mirrors, maybe some like seats inside. You have a lot of elements going on there. You do the same exercise after 2 minutes up, gradually giving them less and less time, let's say 30 seconds less each time. So the next time they draw fewer elements. Eventually you get down to like, here's a piece of paper, you have 5 seconds to draw a car. What does that car look like? To me, that's sort of the form factor, the fundamentals of what that thing should be, and the bare minimum of what you should be building. And at a company level, we've built these super advanced, fully featured cars, right? And we kind of need to get back to like, what is your 5-second car at a company level, to where you can build and get back to like, what is your 5-second car at a product level, at a feature level, all the way down into the user experience. Like, so many people build these super detailed downstream experiences, and then their top of the funnel onboarding is broken. It's like, well, you haven't earned the right to build the stuff downstream because all these other things you got wrong. Your fundamentals were wrong. You didn't understand what was your 5-second car that you had to get right for that thing to even look like a car. And I think so many people, they need to understand that way of building, because they try to sort of earn the right to work on these other things because they're shiny objects. And engineers do this too. Right, but product people do it, designers do it, executives do it because they have to sell. Right? Like, I've worked with some really great salespeople, like at an executive level, but they like to give you that way downstream view of what the world is. And we really need to kind of pull it back and let users help us understand, like, what is that 5-second car? What do companies need to be internally structured as to achieve the performance of what a 5-second car offers? To your point, where it's like, when you have too many decision makers, typically not a great thing, right? Companies that have tens of thousands of people, I've worked at one in the past. It wasn't very fun. There's a lot of like just slowness. It's everything against what you want to be in terms of like if you love customers and you love building for people, you're going to really have a bad time there because no one's going to be able to use the things that you build. And it's very
Exactly.
frustrating.
Yeah, it's this culture of compromise and slowness
Yeah.
where, right, like somebody wished for this sort of thing and it was even one of your customers, and then like 3 years later
Yep.
here's this thing, but I didn't ask for that, but that's what we made anyway, so
Here's your vegetables.
please love it now.
Give me my money. Tell me I'm pretty. Yes.
I think that's a beautiful picture, really. Like, I guess for anyone who worked in startups, like the MVP discussion is always an epic one to have. Like,
Yeah. But I would say like
right?
minimum viable with a B, like what's the minimum thing that someone would actually spend their money on that proves to you it was valuable enough that I'm going to give you something of value in exchange for that. A lot of people try like viable product is too subjective. I can contort that into whatever I want to be. But
Yeah.
viable, it's like, where's your proof? You have revenue coming in or not, right?
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, I think coming out of the century that sort of just, passed with maybe even with the advent of large language models becoming a thing that's really available to use and to develop on. I think I almost feel like that it's not AI that we're sort of struggling with, but maybe it's even the paradigm shift of that we built up these gigantic organizations and structures and workflows to build these immensely complex things, where if you ask someone on the street and they just give you like the triangle of sadness on their forehead, like I think I never went out of a user interview with, it doesn't even matter if it was like a finished piece of software, just a wireframe on a click dummy or whatever, but I never went out of a session without having learned something. And usually it was something bigger that I just didn't see, that I didn't think about because I felt I knew everything about the feature that I'm making. And they just scroll down. It's like, what's that? And you're like,
Yep. A lot of building is like admitting to ourselves that we're wrong and being okay with it. Like there's so much about companies that you see that where people acknowledge internally that they're wrong. They just fail to take action to actually do anything to change that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I personally feel that whenever we learned something from a user test, I really felt so grateful that this was pointed out to me. Like whenever we have, right, like we do these rapid user interviews where we just talk to somebody for 20 minutes and then have them like in succession, and can it be done in like the first half of a day to sort of have the insights by the end of the day. And
Hmm.
because we're not testing the entire software, just testing like this feature or like this idea or whatever. And it's always like, it's also almost always the case that there's this one thing that all of them notice, right? And after person number 3, going into number 4, you're already like, yeah, I know what they're going to
Yep.
say. I just know what they're going to say. Yeah, they
Yeah.
said it. Cool. All right, let's get to work. And I think this is just super, like for me, like after getting into this, it feels much more like liberating, really. And it actually gives me like this high level of confidence going forward that I never had before. Because before I always worked in, like weeks and weeks on this concept. And then we went to the customer and they said, I don't understand what you made. And you're like, okay, shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so this was a really interesting discussion. I'm afraid we sort of have to wrap it up, but I
Sounds
really
good.
love to end on this picture of the 5-second car. I think that's a really beautiful picture for people to keep in mind. And yeah, so I'm personally excited for the next decade to come. I
Same.
totally agree. It's going to be like a lot reconfiguring and learning, but everybody was excited about the internet. So how cool that we get to be this excited again in one
Exactly.
lifetime.
Yeah, I think what you all are doing at Dingy as well, like you mentioned cheat codes, it's a great thing and it's a really important thing right now. So I think a lot of people, they need to catch up. So you can help them. And I'm trying to do the same in my own way, where it's like, if we can just help people build the right things, people are going to benefit around the world, right? And that's what we want, is like, we just want the world to be better through customers, right? If we can just kind of change one experience for the better, but that one experience is used by hundreds of thousands or millions of people, that amplifies throughout the world. So I really want, like, if anyone needs help out there, like, dingy, obviously. And then if I can help in any way, even if it's just a talk, for me, like, I'm here for that. I just want to help people have a much better existence. We have such a short period of time on Earth that it's not worth it on bad software.
Totally. I totally agree. Yeah, we've been on interview now for 2 weeks and it's really cool. Like it's really amazing how we can blast through recorded stuff now. Like it's really cool.
Awesome.
So I can just recommend this, and I'm going to drag this into our bigger project right now because they're not asking the right questions. So yeah, if any of what we talked about today kind of strung a nerve somewhere, please feel free to reach out to Rob, feel free to reach out to me. And really, as you said, just if it's for like a virtual coffee discussion to get you onto a new idea, I'm always open for that. And it sounds like you're too. And yeah, with that, Rob, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It was a
Thank you as
lot
well.
of fun.
Yeah, likewise. And have a good day.
All right. You too.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.